Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel, or if you're new, welcome. So, quick history lesson. About 7 months ago, I uploaded this video. At the time, this felt like my magnum opus. Not because it was particularly any good, I mean the wiring's a mess, but because I was pioneering a new form of useless technology. To me, this was like planting the shattered remains of a hoe into some new, completely untouched territory. And at the time, it was pretty fast. It had a single hoe burn, or 1 depleted durability per game tick, which equates to 20 hoe burns per second, and that's a netherite hoe in 115, just under 2 minutes, and a wooden hoe in just under 3 seconds. Unfortunately, like all things on this channel, the user interface still ended up being terrible, because in order to actually use it, you had to crawl with this trapdoor, and then you had to press this lever, and even then it still only would work half the time, like so. So you'd have to turn it off, and then turn it back on again in order to even get it to function properly. So in hindsight, this thing really wasn't all that great, but in hindsight, I was pretty proud of it. At least until about a month later, when Avogaado releases this video. In a jaw-dropping and incredibly well-edited 3 minutes and 20 seconds, he manages to dash every hope I ever had of being the best hoe burner in the entire world, with this incredibly beautifully constructed 0-tick contraption. This thing boasts 10 hoe burns per 3 ticks, which is 66.7 hoe burns per second, a netherite hoe in 30.4, and a wooden hoe in basically enough time to the point where it doesn't even matter anymore. And it does all of this by having the nicest looking exterior ever, with a completely easily accessible on button. Hey, I was striving for compactness. I didn't get to decide where the lever actually went. Anyways, I should probably get to what made Avogaado's machines just so special. See, the thing is what he changed was how the dirt was supplied to the player. Originally, in order to hoe a new piece of dirt, you had to move the player, which was kind of a no-go, or you had to use pistons, usually 0 ticks, to get the dirt in front of the player really quickly. That's what this machine did. However, Avogaado exploited a little something to do with the dirt's hitbox. The thing is that since it's so short, when it gets hoed, you can actually just reach through and hit the next piece of dirt if you're standing at the right height. And what this means is using mods, you can actually hoe multiple pieces of dirt in the same moment, which allows you to achieve significantly higher hoeing speeds than previously thought possible with a single piece of dirt per tick. You can see this tactic actually being employed in the machine because when it's moving entire rows of dirt, not just one block, which allows you to do that special thing where you can hit multiple pieces of dirt per game tick. And so that's how Avogaado got the record. And speaking of Avogaado, you should definitely go check out their channel. They make a bunch of really cool stuff, and if you like the stuff that I make, then you'll probably like what they make too. They have really nicely edited videos, and they definitely deserve more subscribers than they have. Anyways, enough with the nonsense, let's get out of the introductory stuff and get to how we made it faster. But first, how do we even know if it's possible to make it faster? You see, the thing is that this machine supplied a dirt to the player at every instance it would possible. This one's supplying rows instead. And you'd think that it would supply one at every instance possible, and it certainly looks like it, but it's actually only supplying a row every 2 game ticks and then skipping one. That's why we end up with 10 hoe burns per 3 ticks instead of 15 with a 5 block long row. The actual reason why this is happening is a purely mechanical one based on how the piston stuff is laid out. If you want to look at that, you can check out his video. I'm not going to get into it, but the basic point is that this is kind of inherent to any piston setup I can imagine, so in order to break this record, we're going to need to give up pistons entirely. The way we'll do that is by utilizing the second strategy, moving towards the dirt. The reason why this wasn't considered before was because it's just generally considered wildly inconsistent to use the player movement, but luckily if we can make the second strategy fast enough, that inconsistency is just completely wiped out by the fact that it's generally still faster than your more consistent piston-based setups. So we need to get this player moving across a lot of dirt really quickly. The most obvious solution is to use a frictionless surface and use some sort of propulsion force to make the player start gliding along this path so they can hit every single piece of dirt. Now I can already hear some of you in the comments suggesting I use a piston bolt instead, and at first it might seem they're perfect, they're consistent, they're incredibly fast, and they travel at a uniform 20 blocks per second. Here I'm riding one in one of my really old survival worlds. Now, see, the problem with the piston bolt though is that it forces you to be in a minecart, and the reason why this is a big problem is because it's actually not at the right alignment to reach the dirt. If we actually go ahead and set up this setup, you can clearly hoe the dirt here, but it's very obvious that you can't reach that top level that's required for you to do the trick. It's actually possible to have that kind of angle inside of a minecart, but it requires having this weird setup which is really difficult to recreate on an actual piston bolt, making the piston bolt effectively useless for our specific purpose. Another obvious option might be ice boating, but it suffers from a similar problem with the alignment problem, as well as the fact that you can't hoe anything while moving. So settling with the ice track concept, I needed a lot of different ways to get that sort of propulsion to start moving along the ice track. I can deal with what happens after that after I get moving. I thought about a lot of solutions. A lot of them were explosives related, but ultimately the best method and most consistent was to use entity cramming. In this position here, there are an insane amount of boats, and when I collide with all of those boats at the same time, what's going to happen is I'm going to get sent flying. So essentially, when you turn on fast right click and given the correct alignment, you can very quickly hoe a lot of dirt. And this is already looking to be a lot faster than any more mechanized solution that we can develop. Though the ice track worked really well, what actually turned out to be more effective though is having the Dolphin's Grace effect, which makes you glide through water like nothing, sitting on top of bubble columns and bashing your head into grindstones. This actually works slightly better with slightly less loss of energy. As for replenishing the farmland, it's very easy to just apply a 2-tick repeater pulse to a bunch of sticky pistons, and this very briefly just drops down a layer of glass, which will convert all the dirt back into, well, dirt. And that's essentially it. We can stick one of these boat stations on either side. By the way, I'm running this with about 41 boats, so all the boats that fit into a barrel, hopper, and an associated dispenser. And you can just essentially let it go. By adding a nice piece of string in the very middle to tell the pistons when to fire the glass blocks, and adding a correct amount of delay, you've essentially got the entire setup to breaking a hoe in exactly the fastest way possible. Now, how fast is it really, and how do you even test something like that? Well, essentially what I've got here is this repeating command block, which adds one value to the scoreboard on the right of the screen, and it does that for every single game tick I'm holding a netherite hoe that isn't completely intact. And what that does is it counts from the very moment the netherite hoe takes its first piece of durability to the very moment I'm no longer holding a netherite hoe anymore. And after running a test on Avogaado's machine, that comes out to 631 ticks on the side here. I didn't film it because I did it without shaders for reasons you'll find in the description, but also because it's incredibly flashy. And that number is really close to about the extrapolated 30 seconds I mentioned at the beginning of the video. And then, after running the exact same test on this new machine, it comes out to a whopping 498 ticks, which is 24.9 seconds. Yeah, it's not that much of an increase, but it's still 6 seconds faster. Given that I'm certainly not as talented with redstone as that I can make something like this, I'll take whatever victories I can get. So, what did we learn? I'm gonna be honest, not a whole lot. I learned a couple new things about entity collision and stuff like that, but ultimately what I did not learn was maybe it's best to just let some things die, or maybe getting petty revenge with something that arguably feels like cheating is not the best thing to do. Or perhaps maybe I should just straight up design better machines, because this thing actually is horribly inefficient and could totally be made better in a variety of different ways that I've just not done because it just requires a lot of trial, error, and fine tuning. Ultimately, there are 1,000 ways you can interpret this outcome. I'm just going to go with the simple, naive one and say, hey, I won. I stole that incredibly dumb record that I accidentally set a while back, and now I can finally die in peace. If you like the video, make sure to check out my other stuff, subscribe, and if you want to have a chat with me or talk about anything else, make sure to join my Discord. I'll see you next time.